everybody. I'm Carolyn Hadlock, and this is the Eunoia podcast. Eunoia is the Greek word for beautiful thinking, and that's what the show is all about. I interview beautiful thinkers who are creatives, founders, authors, and CEOs, and I try to get inside their heads. So today I'm talking to Marshall Pollard, aka Mr. P, and Hugh Weber. Mr. P founded the Creative School in DC, an organization that encourages young people to design the changes their community needs. And Hugh, who I previously interviewed as part of the Beautiful Thinker series, is a design theorist and collaborator of Mr. P's. Maybe the place to start is how you two met and what your intersection is.
Go ahead, Hugh.
So a number of years ago now, Marshall and I, unbeknownst to each other, became part of a program within World Economic Forum for a program called Global Shapers. And Global Shapers was an attempt to create space for broadly for millennials, but for young emerging leaders, of which, by the way, I'm not, and I think Marshall is only marginally. But we're asked to launch these hubs and serve as curators. Marshall in Birmingham, myself in Sioux Falls. So I flew to Geneva and was getting on a bus in Switzerland, and it was like a scene out of the movie Forrest Gump, where as I walked down the aisle, the world's representatives all suddenly had very full seats for this overstuffed Midwesterner. And I got about halfway down the aisle. He looked up and just said, more or less, like, sit down. You look foolish standing there looking around, sit down. And within the course of an hour, it was one of those conversations that so many times in spaces where you're with other extraordinary people, the conversations become one of immediately trying to validate credential, right? Like you start to talk about where you went to school or the projects you've worked on. And it's about establishing kind of your own self-confidence. The conversation with Mr. P from the very beginning was one of deep alignment and resonance. It was, this is the way I see the world. Oh, well, that's how I see the world, except I see it from this perspective. You know, have you looked at these tools? Do you know these thinkers? Do you know this way of engaging? And it was one of the few times in life that I felt able to be fully myself from moment one. Mm-hmm. And thus there was such immediate deep alignment that it was clear that despite not being cool enough by about 50% to even sit in space with Mr. P, I felt fully present and I felt fully accepted. All and it sounds crazy to say, but all within moments, all within moments of that initial conversation.
That's very cool.
How did you experience it? I always get to be the one that tells that story.
I mean, I always ask because I like hearing the retail from your perspective. I think what was clear to me in our initial moments is that Hugh is an outsider in his own camp. And given the skin that I am in, that is my reality in most rooms I walk into. And so there was some resonance there of he's not the typical white dude who is not the typical global shaper starter. He fit the mold that I fit. And he fit that in the context of Switzerland. Whereas I think if we would have met in the States, I don't think that I would have spent the type of time that we were afforded, given how he showed up in those spaces as someone who, again, like me, is not typical and doesn't occupy space in the way that we may be perceived from a physical standpoint. So that type of connection around presence and purpose, people, conversations about real people and real relationships that are happening from the places that we were coming from, less like he mentioned, the need to mention where you go to school or what Fortune 500 company you work on the side for while you're trying to do social work. That just wasn't our story. And out of all the hundreds of leaders in the world, it was I've connected with this dude from Sioux Falls, South Dakota for the last now 5 years, which is crazy. We're past 5 years now, Hugh, which is crazy.
That's crazy.
It was 2015.
Mr. P, it would be great. I've been reading up on the Creative School. Would you just talk about how that came to be and maybe even through the lens of reform? What's your vision for it?
Yeah. So the Creative School was born out of a commitment to live out a belief that young people should have a lot more power in what they choose to do in their day. These young people are required to spend their days doing things that have for generations perpetuated a narrative that says that they don't have access to a life of quality. So how might we disrupt these design frameworks that are often adult driven, which perpetuates ageism, and majority culture, which says that our Black and brown children don't have a space as designers, right? And so what we discovered was a method by which young people can become, instead of participants in their day, to become designers in their day. Our queens and kings aren't just participating in some type of user-centered design where they get to inform their day, but they get to be the ones that are the designers. And we get to be the ones who are the users that they get to engage with, to decide how, with our context and knowledge, how they could use that to say, this is how I want to spend my time creatively. And so our young people capture stories of their friends and elders so that they can cultivate goods and services that honor the stories of their place and elevate well-being for the circle of people that they're connected to. And so the work expanded from young people designing chess clubs and baseball teams and yoga sessions to now really stamping a design framework that we call story-centered design. And so that's where the Creative School got its start. And we're trying to be responsive to a moment that many other people are waking up to. Our young people have been living in health disparity, living in spaces that have been very consequential to their health prior to COVID-19. And it's amplified the reality that our young people live in. They are also not new to the pandemic that many in our world woke up to on May 26th after police officers stood on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. This is not new to the queens and kings of the Creative School. Yeah. These young people are living in a world where they see death and they see loss as if it's their birthright. And so our young people have a place to lead in this moment, but it's not new to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. One of the products that you make is a juice, which you call Drip. Can you tell me how that came to be and how the community engages with that?
Yeah, so Drip is 100% owned and operated by our young people. And the way that manifests is twofold. We have community health days pretty much once a month where our kids and their elders are invited to show up to showcase our programming, which includes yoga, chess, podcasting, photography, boxing, other creative outlets for all ages. And while we host that moment to say, hey, look at a community of people who care about their health, we also pass out the bottles of Drip. And the bottles of Drip are free. We don't sell them when we bring our network together, but they're in exchange for a story that then young people take all those answers and aggregate and come up with content that could inform and help the community connect around what could be created, right? So if we capture stories, which is the first part of the design framework, because we passed out Drip in exchange for a story, we can then connect people around the stories that were captured. On July 18th, it was the 1-year anniversary of us losing Karan, who was a king who was in our programming. He was shot and killed on July 18th, 2019 for passing out water at a gas station. And therefore, we're not going to just ignore that. Pandemic or not, our young people and Karan's people are grieving. So we bring, this is the first annual Karan Brown Day, and we intend on bringing our community together every year on July 18th. And during this first annual Karan Brown Day, we passed out 150 bottles of Drip in exchange for an idea about how people are committed to protecting queens and kings. And so literally you get a bottle of Drip and you're asked, for this example for podcast audio, to state, my name is Marshall Pollard. I'm from Southeast DC and I protect queens and kings by blank. The first step is to write it down. And if you want to then be interviewed on the podcast, you can then use what you wrote down to short and simple state that. We take the 150 plus answers that we got, we transcribe them. And so we now know, based on the 150 answers, where are the themes, where are people saying the same thing, right? And we put that in front of our young people and they decide, here are the answers, here are the ideas that I like the most, right? The hosts of the podcast. So story-centered design is, again, about passing out juice in exchange for an idea and creating content that a community can connect around.
And then how do you make the juice? How does that get funded?
Yeah. Making it and funding it are two different things. So our model is that, we fundraise for opportunities for young people in preparation for community health days to press the samples that are necessary and to press the amount of ingredients that are necessary to put into about, at this point, 2,500 bottles a year. We have yet to sell drip because of we're establishing the financial framework where the money and proceeds do not go to the creative school, right? But they go to a community investment, a kind of circle or a foundation that we're establishing that young people get to be a part of and decide what do we do with the revenue, right? That's why we haven't sold it yet, but we're approaching a fiscal year where we intend to do that. We give out free bottles of drip during community health days, and then we're setting up partnerships in the local with local vendors to do some of the selling. So in terms of what it looks like, we have a partnership with a group called Gangster Vegan, which is based on their supply chain and what ingredients and produce they have access to. We then teach young people about those ingredients. They get to decide which ingredients they want to combine to come up with a sample recipe. And then that process then goes into, now that we have a recipe, which ones do you like? Which ones should we put in bottles? Which they also then at their store put in bottles.
I'm curious because I know you deploy the moniker Kings and Queens and where that came from.
Identity is super important, and our young people need to believe that the world that they inherited, which again is set up to limit the number of relationships that they have access to in order to live a life of quality, that those relationships that they deserve should affirm their identity instead of perpetuate the one that is clear in this world. We need to disrupt that narrative in the way that we address you every single day. And so if you are being addressed as a king or a queen, if people are around you who believe that you are a king and queen, that is at odds with the narrative that you've inherited.
Gotcha. And Hugh, I know you mentioned a little bit about how you guys differ and how you're similar. And I know you talk about the network of influence as well. Maybe you could just layer on top your philosophy and where those two find common ground.
Yeah, that's great. I'll never forget the first visit actually to the classroom and to the creative school, because it was a moment of recognizing a number of things, recognizing the theories and the research and the less tangible aspects of the work that I do already lived and existed, and even in a state of design disconnection was thriving in communities like Southeast DC. We were prepping for that space where I was going to share with some teachers, some kings and queens, and some parents. And Marshall, in a way that he is both incredibly kind, by that I mean like he is direct, said, I trust you. As a result, there's the possibility of this community trusting you, but know that there's a heritage of people that have come into our community, told us how to exist or be or live or succeed, often in incredible misalignment or dissonance with who we are and the experience and truths of the community as we know them and experience them. And then they leave. And you're going to do that. Like, you're going to walk in this room and you're going to share a bunch of things, and then you're going to go back to South Dakota. And unless you acknowledge that, and unless you are able to sit with the discomfort of that truth, this is not going to be successful. It was recognize that this is not your community, but that you have tools that might be of use to this community that they will look at, interrogate and consider and explore and redesign and rename, and that this is the opportunity. And stepping into that space, because of that trust that we have, there was so much more that was, I think, possible in that moment. I tell the story often of Zachary, who's one of the kings that was in those first sessions. I'll never forget how he processed. I shared a lot of the relationships of influence theory. We walked through some of the application in communities that I know, like the small town I grew up in South Dakota. His teachers asked questions and people that participated asked questions. And then P turned to him and just said, Zachary, what do you think of this? And Zachary, having dispensed with the theory, having dispensed with anything I named them, having dispensed with any of the presumptions of adulthood, just looked at this map of dots and lines and said, these dots over here, they know each other, and they're dancing and singing and thriving and having a great time. And these dots over here that are disconnected don't know as many people, and they're quiet and they might be lonely. And if we can get these dots and these dots to share stories, then everyone can be well. And, my work, I'm an emotional guy. My work has never been more meaningful. Like, it's never been more resonant. It's never been better explained before or since. It's never been more true, because it was a space that was created to hold loosely to the ideas and ownership and any of that kind of intellectual property that we can as adults get so bound up in. It was where the alignment came in. It was where a young king, a young designer with a lived experience as a preteen that was dramatically different than anything I had experienced in my 40 years, was able to see the work and see the pieces that were valuable, that were resonant, and make that connection. Like, that was a moment of clarity for me of where I had been limiting my work and myself and these ideas in such a dramatic way by trying to hold them too tightly, by trying to hold them and keep them too well defined. And the clarity emerged immediately that these ideas of relationships that matter, that are personal, that are reciprocal, that are intentional, exist everywhere. We can give them names to better explain them and frameworks to better share them. But Zakari understood it as well as he understood his own story, because he lives it every day. And it looks different, and it speaks different, it has different rhythms, but it is the same truth.
Yeah. Is that how you remember that moment too, Mr. P? I'm curious to hear your perception.
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts come to mind. One, when we talk about what leads young people to access a life of quality, and when I say that, I am unapologetic when I mean health and wealth. That is what is transferable in this country, in this economy, in this world. And we are living in a system that has predetermined that Zakari should not have access to that. And so when you think about practically having moments in a day where you get to experience the antithesis of this design that you've inherited, it does become a matter of dots and naming them by names. One of my favorite memories in January was a king who is also a part of our fresh press juice brand that we create. Daniel looked at one of the elders who is a part of our team, and he looked right at him and said, "Hey, where you been?" And that might not seem like anything, but what Daniel's saying is, you are a dot, and I haven't seen you in a little bit, so where you been? Right? And the power of young people to recognize who is their network, who are those dots. If we're going to disrupt what young people have inherited, a reality that has said you just won't have access to the relationships you need to make it, to be healthy and wealthy, right? So our young people need to know who they're creating with by name, not just that they passed out a bottle of juice, they got an idea, and they don't know that person afterwards. That doesn't change their inheritance. What changes is when those people, those relationships of influence, are compellingly invited to stay connected, and that's done over time.
I'm curious from your perspective, Mr. P. So I definitely see how the kids benefit from the elders and having them in their space. How do the elders benefit from the kids?
It's a great question. I think twofold. Our network membership is serious. And so if you join the Stay Dreaming Network, which means that you believe in seeding and sharing power with young people, that means you yourself are going to have access to the network members that are on that same tip, right? So we have dozens of yogis who are committed to doing yoga with young people, and that's creating an ecosystem for yogis in DC that are on the same level of awareness of how they're trying to move. And so we're providing opportunities for our network members to know each other and to be able to benefit from those relationships independent of us. What we are trusting is that if you are coming to do yoga, right? If you are coming to play chess, because in this crazy world that we live in, you taking time to slow down, be in your neighborhood, be connected to residents that you live around is actually for your well-being. You're also then by proxy going to have relationships that could maybe help you move in that 9-to-5 space, right? So creating moments for personal well-being that then lend to communal well-being for both our youth and our elders. The second, more long-term aspiration, it's around the idea of wealth and wealth creation, supporting wealth creation, right? So as young people continue to distribute drip in exchange for ideas about what goods and services they might create, These are opportunities for our elders to invest in grassroots businesses, to grow wealth at a grassroots level. And as we begin to create a marketplace for our young people to sell their goods and services at a broad level, you're now part of a community that is taking financial literacy classes together, because the reality is far too many of us, including myself, did not receive financial literacy, and we were prevented from understanding financial literacy in the communities that need financial literacy more than others. What excites me about growing our network and our infrastructure is when you have an ecosystem of people you can name by name, you're now able to build partnerships in the community that say, me showing up to chess once a week, yoga once a week, whatever creative programming that our young people have for both youth and elders, that's going to increase my network participation, which should be rewarded.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that maybe we need to look to ourselves and our communities to solve and have the greatest impact for transformation through reform versus the government? Or do we think there's a role that they can play?
I don't know if I'm going to give you the common answer, but I believe that, again, this word inheritance that I've used, and I've shared this with Hugh, and it's a helpful analogy that I think represents how I'll answer your question. A favorite author of mine, Beverly Tatum, in her book, Why Are All the Black Children Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? She equates this system to a moving walkway in the airport, right? And that there's this thing that's set up before you get there, right? Before you're born, before you get to the airport, and it's moving. And it's been set up to advance a cause, advance an ability to get somewhere. And there are certain people by their birthright who have access to this moving walkway. And some people who, because of their access, they stand on it and they take advantage of a system of white supremacy. And they sit on the walkway as it moves. Some love it so much that they walk or run in the direction. And some are aware of its tragic flaws for themselves and others, and they walk backwards. And some are so committed to those tragic flaws that they're underneath the moving walkway, dismantling it so that it doesn't work. And unfortunately, there are people in this country and in this world who do not have access to that walkway. They are walking in the same direction. They are observing how much easier it is for other people who might even look like them, right? Might be poor like them, might be other like them, right? But they just don't have access to it. And so when we think about the answers to this moment, it's less about, in my mind, the dichotomy between those outside of our communities and those inside of our communities. It's a need to be on the same page about the walkway, to not have arguments that the walkway exists. And if we can get there, then we can begin to collectively, both our governments and our members in the community, to say, what's the new system? What's the new walkway that is more expansive, that is more available for all people, right? Not let's change a system that is working. Let's reform a system that is working, right? So what does that say about what we're telling our young people to go spend their days doing? And then upset with them that they say, nah, I'm good. Like, this ain't working. I have evidence all around me that there's another game I need to participate in that could give me access to health and wealth. And it might be seen as illegal. It might be more stressful, more risky, but there's too much evidence around me that this thing people tell me I'm supposed to do ain't working, right? So is the answer our federal government or our community? I do think it's both. I do think that at the grassroots level, we have more control over our disruption of the narrative that we're a part of. And so at the end of the day, I think strength in numbers in the community is what I'm committed to. But I think in that pursuit of building strengths in numbers, it's creating a culture that is unapologetic about the systems that are at war. It's not a softer word than that are at war against the children that I spend my time with. And if in that circle, everyone's hip to that war, then we'll have elected officials in there. And hopefully those people who are hip to the war are representing these young people in council meetings and with legislation and policy. But to me, it's not looking to our federal government to
carry the whole thing.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is missing from that is, while he does that work, while he engages and his network and community engage, I have the convenience and the privilege to just stay on the walkway. Mm-hmm. And unless my 11 and 7-year-old have a familiarity with the metaphor, nothing systematically at a broader scale changes. So we have those conversations. I was having a conversation about hiring, and we were struggling. I live in a lot of extraordinary design circles and community circles, and the candidates that we had were primarily white. And I was having this conversation with my wife, my partner, and my daughter overheard it from the other room and said, "Dad," like literally still speaking while she was making something, "Dad, if you believe that you need a diverse team to succeed, you've got to step off the walkway, even if it's hard." Like literally use the metaphor as an 11-year-old, right? And that is not to elevate a child that is precocious. That is to say that white communities can be more than allies. They can be, as a leader in the Lakota community said here recently, "I don't want allies, I want accomplices." Like white communities and white leaders that are sincere about this work can deconstruct the walkway even when their children are those that benefit. It's about the same commitment to wellness in a community that I live and thrive in as part of a broader holistic and beloved community that we all exist in and hope to be well in.
And just a quick note on that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you say like to benefit children that might not be on the walkway, right? And what I would say is by doing so, you're benefiting yourself.
Yeah, it is self-interested.
Yes, it's very, and it must be.
And it can be, and it should be.
No,
right?
it must be. It must be. It must be this, not equality. Right. Equality says everybody's got to be on the walkway. Equity recognizes that not everyone is, and therefore, in order for it to be right, and for me to be right and to be healthy and well, then I must create an environment in which it either doesn't exist or we both are on it, right? Not one or the other. And so if we're in a dark room, and I use this analogy a lot, and we all have lighters, and we are all on the same page that certain people can play with fire. And so therefore they should be the ones that turn their lighters on, but yet everyone has a lighter. We're fools. We're darker than it could be. It just creates this reality where there's winners and losers, and our young people need to believe that does not have to be the case. There are rooms to walk into that are not set up for one person to win and others to lose. There's different types of ecosystems that stand at odds with the normal narrative that I believe Generation Z and their children could 50 years from now could be living in a very different world because they've walked into rooms that are set up differently than the ones that we as elders have just kind of been like, yeah, it's normal. Like, this is just what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been super inspiring to chat with you.
Thanks, friends.
Absolutely.
Bye, peace.
Take care.
All right, take care.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. And I hope you took something from it. Something that'll help you with your next meeting, next pitch, your next big project. But above all, I hope it inspires you to think strange, different, new, and beautiful thoughts. For more from this interview and other chats with beautiful thinkers, visit CarolynHadlock.com to subscribe on Medium and follow @Unoia Quarterly on Instagram. That's EUNOIA Quarterly.